I want to thank the Reveal Conference. This is a really cool thing that you guys got going on, and I want to thank everybody that's helped put this on here at Indiana University Southeast from Crew and Christian Student Fellowship. Thank you so much for making this possible. It's been really cool just having a few small conversations as we're getting things ready. I can tell that people here have a desire for truth and to know the truth and to let other people know the truth. Now, how many here would say that you're on a journey to discover truth? Anybody? Well, good. And that's really how it should be. And do you realize that if your goal is truth, you're always in a win-win situation no matter what? I realize that if I was more committed to truth than anything else, when I get into conversations, then I will either help somebody come to truth, or if I happen to be wrong about something, they can help me come to truth. And so you're always in a win-win situation. Oftentimes I say, hey, I'm more committed to truth than I am to Christianity. And people are like, whoa, wait, how can you say that? And I said, well, since I'm more committed to truth than I am to anything else, that's why I'm a Christian, because it's true. All the evidence points to the fact that Christianity is true. And I love to show people exactly why that's the case. But before I go on, I got to tell you, and as Dan mentioned, I am a recovering youth pastor. Anybody here? Any youth pastors here? All right, so you feel my pain, right? I mean, you know what it's like. I was in youth ministry. I started in 1998 in youth ministry. Started in a church in California in Santa Cruz. I'm from Nebraska, and I moved back to Nebraska and did youth ministry there with Youth for Christ for a while, and then did some college work with Navigators. And then I started working at a church there in Kearney, Nebraska in 2006. And I got to tell you, I was a good youth pastor. I knew how to throw the best parties. Right? I'd always bring in the best rock bands, Christian rock bands, and I'd always have the best pizza and pop. Do you guys call it pop or soda, or what do you call it here? It's soda here?
Soft drinks.
Soft drinks? Okay, it's pop in Nebraska. Where I'm from. I'll take a pop. You go down south and you're like, okay, I'll have a Coke. You're like, well, what kind? I'm like, what? A Coke. Like, well, do you want Pepsi or Coca-Cola? I'm like, what? Okay, but yeah, we drink pop. But anyway, I'd always have the best bands, the best parties, the best pizza, the best pop. And I would just pack it out every Wednesday night. I'd throw out a few Bible verses here and there, but really I was about having fun. Now, I did have a Bible study with a few of the young men. So I started in 2006, and there was this freshman there. And he joined my Bible study. And, all we would do is we would read through the scriptures, talk about it, what it meant to you, what it meant to me, it was a good time. And then we'd go play some Xbox or shoot some hoops or something like that. Fast forward 2 years, 2008, I'm getting ready for the back to school bash, right? We just finished the summer, and again, I was going to throw this big party. And this young man comes and he taps me on the shoulder. And he says, Tim, I just want to let you know I'm not coming to the party tonight. I'm like, what? Why? I got this band going. You're going to love this. And he goes, yeah, well, I'm just not coming back to youth group either. Well, what, are you going to some other youth group? I mean, what youth pastor is stealing my kids? And he goes, no, I'm not going to any youth group. I'm like, well, you still going to church, right? No, not doing that. Well, you still got to be coming to our Bible study. You've been in my Bible study for 2 years. No, I'm not coming back to Bible study either. Because over the summer, I've been watching a lot of YouTube, reading a lot of books, listening to speakers like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Stephen Hawking. Fill in the blank with your favorite atheist. And I've come to realize, he said, that book you've been forcing me to read for the last 2 years, that's nothing but fairy tales. God does not exist. And I said, dude, you know that's not true. And he said, no, I don't know that, Tim. I said, you know that's not true. He goes, no. He said, don't put words in my mouth. So I thought, okay, if I raise my voice, surely I'll get to him. You know that's not true. And he says, I don't know that, Tim. He goes, I'll tell you what. If you can answer one of these questions, one of these objections, I'll stick around. I'm like, all right. Guess how many I could answer? Probably gave me a dozen. Guess how many I could answer? That's right, 0. Absolutely 0. And then I appealed to him once again. I said, but look, we've been reading the Bible. You know that this is the Word of God. And he goes, no, I don't know that, Tim. Again, how many times do I have to say that? And I said, but look, Paul tells Timothy right here that every word of this book is inspired by God. See? And he goes, yeah, but I don't think that's true. Why should I think that's true? And I said, because it's the Word of God. And he goes, yeah, Tim, but why should I think it's the Word of God? Well, look, it says it right here. And he goes, Tim, do you know anything about logic? He goes, that's circular reasoning. That's a logical fallacy. And therefore, you've provided me no reason to think it is the Word of God. And he looked at me with disgust. And he had actually tears welling up in his eyes. And he looked at me like, you let me down as a pastor. Aren't you supposed to be a shepherd? Aren't you supposed to protect me? And I failed him. And he turned around and he walked out of the doors of the church. And that shook me. Definitely didn't enjoy the back-to-school bash, I'll tell you that much. But I went home that night, and several things shook me here. Here's a young man who I was in charge of. I was supposed to be his pastor, his shepherd, and I failed him. He became an atheist. What? I am producing atheists out of my youth group, and guess what? He influenced many others. Several others followed him. And some that might not have followed him, you could tell they really had a shaken faith. This kid was smart. He was brilliant. So here I was, the youth pastor who knew how to party, that was creating atheists, and at least creating skeptics and doubters and Christians with a weak faith. I saw so many young people struggle with doubt. And many were defeated by these doubts. I went home that night with a shaken faith, and I prayed. I'm like, God, what should I do here? I never considered myself to be the smart kid growing up. In fact, I was on the basketball team, and I was always the guy that the coach was saying, Tim, you're almost ineligible to be on the team. You got to get your grades up, or you can't play this next game. And do you guys take the ACT or the SAT in these parts? SAT. Okay, well, in Nebraska we take the ACT. Probably a low score would be around 21 or so. And yeah, I got a 14. I've never been the smart kid. I did do my undergrad at the University of Nebraska. Somehow I got through. I should say, I thought D stood for degree. A lot of times they did label me as a gifted student, because every time I got a C, that was a gift, right? But I struggle with this kind of thing, and now I realize I'm facing these objections and these arguments from physicists and philosophers with PhDs, these atheists with PhDs, and you want me, God, are you calling me to interact with these philosophers and physicists? I'm not that guy. But I prayed and I asked for wisdom and knowledge. There's a Bible verse about that. And I felt like God said, hey, I will transform you by the renewing of your mind. if you work hard. Because I'm not just going to zap you, but you got to put in some work. And so I've devoted the last decade or so to finding out, is Christianity really true? Am I a Christian just because I was raised in the middle of the nation where everybody else claims to be a Christian? Or am I a Christian just because my parents were Christians and I was raised that way? Or is it really true? Because this young man brought a lot of questions, very good questions, I got to say. At face value, when I looked at these things, they were good questions. It shook me. Now, I knew when he was offering these objections, I knew that Christianity was true. How did I know? Because I have a personal relationship with God, right? Man, he started saying, Tim, that's just indigestion. How can you even trust that? Muslims say that they have that same feeling. Mormons say they have that same feeling. He was shaking me, this 16-year-old, teaching me about logic, teaching me about science. Well, I've devoted my life to answering these questions and to defeating these objections. As the Apostle Paul would say in 2 Corinthians 10:5, to destroy these objections raised against the knowledge of God. And today I spend most of my time on the internet. I also like to come to college campuses. But I work for Free Thinking Ministries. And our goal is to answer that kid every single day, that 16-year-old. Oh yeah, that was back in 2008, but I see him on every college campus. I see him on every Facebook thread. I see him in all the comments on YouTube videos. He's all over. And I never want to fail him again. So I want to answer these questions. And the battle of the mind today is fought on Facebook. It's fought on YouTube. And this is where I feel like God has called me to spend most of my time, as well as university campuses. So please, I encourage you to familiarize yourself with my website, freethinkingministries.com. Also, please subscribe to our recently launched YouTube channel and help us get the word out. But tonight I want to address one of the specific objections that 16-year-old raised back in 2008. Indeed, it's an objection that I see quite often on the internet and I run into all the time on college campuses. Maybe you can tell me if it's one that you hear here on this campus. But it's one of the greatest reasons for skepticism today. They'll say, science. I am a person of science, not of faith. You can be a person of faith, Tim, good for you, but I am a person of science. In fact, a lot of times I'll hear it stated this way: science has killed God. Have you ever heard something like that before? Science has killed God. Now, of course, those espousing this claim don't mean this in a literal sense. What these atheists hope to communicate is that science has somehow removed the need for God, or stronger, that science has somehow demonstrated the non-existence of God. This is what that young man was doing that evening in 2008. And he had a big impact, not just on the youth group, but on the entire high school. Statements like these, that science has somehow proven that God does not exist, or that the Bible is false, or that Christianity is false. Statements like these lead many people of all ages to think that these two concepts, God and science, are mutually exclusive, that they're somehow at war with each other. Well, tonight I address the question, can God and science both be true? Is there a conflict? Now, why is this important for you? Why is it good that you're here tonight? I guess I need to find out who I'm talking to, who's in the audience tonight. So raise your hand. How many of you are Christians? Raise your hand if you consider yourself to be a Christian. Definitely the majority here tonight. I'm glad to see many Christians here. All right, let me ask some more questions. How many of you are extremely confident Christians who, you don't really doubt your faith? Raise your hand if you're very confident. Okay, much less, right? You don't struggle with doubt. That's great. How many of you would say, yeah, I'm a Christian, but I do have lots of questions, some that keep me up at night that I don't like. I'd like to get these questions answered. Raise your hand if you're like, yeah, I am a Christian, but I do struggle with doubt. Raise your hand if that's you. All right, I want to thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much. And there's nothing wrong with where you're at right now. I went through, even when I was at Biola, going to Biola University and getting a master's degree in apologetics. To do that, you have to look at all of the best arguments against God. There were some times where I was like, whoa. But I've worked through all of them, and today my faith is stronger than it's ever been before. But man, that was a tough 3 years going through that. Being exposed, it's like getting exposed to the coronavirus on purpose or something, exposing yourself to this. But I've come through the other side of this much stronger. I have a very strong faith now. Many of my sub-beliefs underneath that umbrella of the Christian belief have changed along the way. Many because of these scientific statements. But my faith in Christianity has grown so much stronger. That big umbrella has grown so much stronger. And I'd be happy to discuss some of these sub-beliefs. Anyway, let me see who's here. So let's see, how many of you are Christians but have the questions? You guys raise your hand. How many of you are not Christians, but you haven't ruled it out? You're kind of checking to see if there's anything there. Do I have anybody here tonight would say, I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but I'm really open to it? So I've got a friendly audience tonight. Okay, great. That helps me know who I'm talking to. Is there anybody here that says, and I don't want to single anybody out, but is there anybody here tonight that say, no, I'm an atheist, God doesn't exist? Okay, very friendly crowd tonight. Okay, well, that helps me. Okay, now, why is this important that you guys, especially that first category of people that say, man, I don't have any doubts. I've got the strong faith. I don't even doubt anymore. Why is it important that you're here listening to a talk like this? Any guesses? Yeah, iron sharpens iron, baby. That's right. And you are here so you can be that iron for other Christians, right? Even if you personally have no doubts about God. I didn't when that young man first came to me. I was just, I gave my life to Christ at 3 years old, right before my 4th birthday, right before Star Wars came out. My great-grandpa died, and my mom used Weebles. For those of you that are old enough to remember what Weebles are, right? These little toys, and she used these Weebles to explain death and heaven to me. I won't go into the details of how she did this, but I remember asking, here's what's cool about the Bible, since I'm talking to a Christian crowd tonight. The gospel is really so simple that a 3-year-old can grasp it. But you know what else I love about the Bible? There's so many parts about it that are not easy to understand. And that allows us to argue as Christians behind the doors of the church and sharpen each other like iron. I love arguing with brothers and sisters in Christ on these peripheral details. Right? I love it. And it's good if we are focused on loving and being respectful and being iron sharpeners and not jerks, then this is just a great practice. But I love the fact that, man, I just got done writing an entire 350-page PhD dissertation on some of these peripheral issues. I think it's so much fun, but I am so grateful that the main thing is easy to understand, the gospel. So that's really cool. That's a side note. You get that for free. It's important that you're here tonight because there's people that you love and care about who do have those doubts. And you need to be better prepared than I was in 2008. Because I created atheists by not knowing how to answer their questions, which is unbiblical. I was not just a bad youth pastor, but a bad Christian in that sense. Because we are called to be reasonable. We are called to answer questions. We are called to destroy objections raised against the knowledge of God, and I could not do any of that. Oh, my faith was strong at the time, but I couldn't strengthen anybody else's faith, especially those who doubted. So for those of you that don't have doubts tonight, I'm thankful that you're here, because this might not be good for your personal faith, but it will be good for the faith of others that you love and care about, which should be everybody from your neighbors to your enemies, right? Now, my son, he's 17 years old now, currently a junior at Kearney High School. He runs cross country and he wrestles. One of the best wrestling teams in the nation, actually. I think they're always ranked somewhere between in the top 30 or so. And had a rough end of the season though, before the state championship, broke his hand, bummer. But he's just a great little wrestler. He's a lightweight guy. But a couple years ago, his freshman year of high school, I mean, he's a little guy back then, and he's in the cross-country locker room, and at his locker, getting his stuff out of his locker, and they shared it with the football team. And these two senior linemen were in the locker room at the same time. And Ethan overheard them talking. And they're like, "Hey, Ethan, you're not one of those Christians, are you?" Ethan, 2 weeks into his freshman year, little guy, these two big guys, both popular guys in the school, right? And he's like, "Oh man, I didn't want this." He's looking into his locker and he's just like, whew. He shuts his locker. He turns around and looks at these guys. He goes, "Well, I'm a Christian. What you gonna do?" And they said, "You're a Christian? You're one of those Jesus freaks? Don't you know how stupid you are to be a Christian?" And he goes, "Well, why would you say a thing like that? Why think a thing like that?" That's a great question to memorize, by the way. When somebody makes a claim, say, "Why think a thing like that?" How'd you reach that conclusion? Well, Ethan started asking them questions. And they said, "Well, don't you know that science has disproved God?" And Ethan said, "Oh, really? What scientific data are you referring to?" "Well, the Big Bang. The Big Bang proves that God doesn't exist." And Ethan says, "Really? I think that's actually my evidence and not yours." I'll explain why here in a bit. But these guys, and people like these guys, and people like that student back in 2008, are making these kinds of claims, and many people don't even know the right questions to ask in return. And many people today have a weak faith at best, or they become atheists at worst. So here's a question to the confident Christians here, and I'm glad you're confident. Will you be able to rationally engage on this topic in the public square? Tonight will be the first step in preparing you to do such a thing. Now, for those of you that are here who were honest enough to say, "Yeah, I have doubts," and maybe they're just passing doubts that go through your mind from time to time, hey, that's okay. Here's a question for you. Will you be able to take your thoughts captive, as Paul discusses in 2 Corinthians 10:5, before you're taken captive by these doubting thoughts? Paul tells us to take thoughts captive in 2 Corinthians 10:5, but in Colossians 2:8 also says that we can be taken captive by bad thinking. You see, this is the spiritual war. This is where the war is fought. It's the battle of the mind. Taking thoughts captive before they take you. Every day. It's a battle of thinking. Another reason why we call ourselves Free Thinking Ministries. Well, be that as it may, this talk tonight has something for everybody. Even if you're sitting out there and you didn't raise your hand and you're like, "Yeah, I'm either an agnostic or an atheist," it still has something for you. And I'm glad you're here. So pay close attention and take some good notes. If I had to say there's an objective sentence for tonight's talk, it would be this. When one doubts the existence of God because of science, remember 3 things. Right? When one doubts the existence of God because of science, remember 3 things. First, science is the wrong field. I guess I didn't have I'm missing a slide I thought I had there. Okay, never mind. Science is the wrong field. Write that down if you're taking notes. Science is the wrong field. Now, before continuing, let me define what I mean by both science and God. What does it mean to do science? What is the job of a scientist? Observe, test, and repeat. What are they observing, testing, and repeating? What are they studying? What does a scientist study? The physical world, nature, right? It's an easy definition that I can get most scientists to affirm. That science is the study of nature. Now, I'm going to tell you that science is the wrong field. Why? Well, because science is commonly understood to be the study of nature, and it follows that a scientist is therefore one that does what? Studies nature. Exactly. Now, this means scientists have specific expertise in understanding nature based on observable data through the scientific method. That's what you were talking about. This is the field of a scientist. This is what a scientist does for a living. A chemist, for example, can share insights about chemistry. That's what their PhD allows them to do. They have expertise in chemistry. But they begin departing their field of expertise when they make statements about other areas of science, such as biology or physics. Now, a scientist is completely out of their field when they make expertise claims on other things like literary criticism or art appreciation or politics, ethics, or anything other than nature. Why? Because a scientist's job is to study nature. So they're in the wrong field when they begin pontificating about anything else that is other than nature. Now, this is not to say that a scientist can't have intelligent thoughts and opinions. Scientists are typically pretty smart, right? That means they can probably have intelligent thoughts and opinions on other issues. But it's important to realize what that PhD behind their name gives them expertise on which to comment. So, simply put, science is the study of nature, and thus a scientist is one who studies nature. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Are you tracking with me? Okay. With that in mind, let's talk about God. Because the objection is that science and God are incompatible, or that science has somehow disproved God, or science has somehow disproven Christianity. That's what people claim. And I'm saying that science is the wrong field. Well, why? Because science is the study of nature. That's how we've defined science. Now let's talk about God. As I like to say to my skeptical friends, even if you don't think God exists, if God exists, He is the creator of all nature by definition. Right? So I know, to my atheist friends that look and say, I know you don't think God exists, but would you at least agree with me, if you happen to be wrong, right? That if God exists, He is the creator of all nature. And they'll say yes. So, here we go. I think this is the right one. If God is the creator of everything nature, then it logically follows that God cannot be something found in nature. Does that make sense? If God is the creator, even if you don't think He exists, if God is the creator of all nature, then God cannot be found in nature. Now, what does a scientist do? They study nature. Should they expect to find God? So it follows that the one who studies nature A scientist is simply in the wrong field if they claim their credentials give them any special authority to speak about the existence or the non-existence of anything other than nature, like God. You might as well ask a plumber what they think. Nothing against plumbers. I'm thankful for plumbers. I don't know how to fix the pipes under my sink, but I'm glad plumbers do. But should a plumber expect to find anything other than nature in the pipes under my sink? No, that's not their job. Should a scientist expect to find anything other than nature when they're in the lab? When they're working with their Bunsen burners and their Petri dishes? No, science is the wrong field. Now, a scientist at the University of Nebraska recently objected to me when he heard me making these claims. And he said, "Tim, you idiot, don't you know that science is the only way to know? Science is the only way to know." What do you guys think of? Has anybody ever heard of somebody making a claim like that before? You hear it quite often. There's this biologist, probably the most aggressive atheist in Nebraska, confronting me, saying, "Science is the only way to know things, Tim." How would you respond to that?
How do you know that?
Yeah, think about that. What is he doing? He's making a philosophical claim. Well, I responded with, "Really? How do you know that? How do you know that science is the only way to know? Did you gain this knowledge in the lab? Did you gain this knowledge when using a Petri dish and a Bunsen burner? Did it provide you this knowledge that science is the only way to gain knowledge?" And he's like, "Well, no." Well, then you've just offered a self-defeating statement that is logically incoherent and therefore must be rejected by any rational person. Have you ever heard of a self-defeating statement before? A self-defeating statement must be false. It's like saying this: there are no sentences comprised of more than 3 words. How many words were in that sentence? 10. Should you believe me? No. It must be false by definition. Or if I said, "I cannot speak a word of English," should you believe me? No. And so it's an irrational, incoherent statement. Similarly, when somebody says science is the only way to know, that's just as irrational and incoherent. And so I like to point out to my scientist friends, nothing against scientists. I thank God for scientists. I'm going to talk about that more later. But to my scientist friends who are confused and make claims like that, I'm like, look, you're making irrational statements, and we want rational scientists doing science. Science is not bedrock. Logic is bedrock. Logic is bedrock. You can't get beneath logic. Now, some of you, a lot of Christians in the crowd tonight saying, "Tim, logic isn't bedrock. The Bible is bedrock." Really? Well, do you want to interpret the Bible logically, or can we interpret the Bible illogically and reach incoherent conclusions and believe whatever we want when we read it? Obviously, we want to interpret it correctly, and that requires logic. Which, side note, this is for free as well. When you read John 1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God." What's the Greek word for word? Yeah, logos, logos. Logos in Greek means the principle of reason. The principle of reason. Logic. In fact, logos is where we get the word logic. So what is John saying? In the beginning was the logic, and the logic was with God, and the logic was God. What? John's calling Jesus logic, the principle of reason, the only way to make sense of reality. Wow. So you see, when we start with logic, we're starting with the nature of God. Christians should be the most logical people on the face of the planet. In my youth pastor days, I was not. I hope to remedy that. Anyway, science is the only way to know is an incoherent and irrational statement. So the first thing to remember when doubting the existence of God because of science is that science is the wrong field. That's the first thing to remember. It makes just as much sense to think that Pop-Tarts should cause you to doubt the existence of God. That would be crazy. Science should not cause you to doubt the existence of God. And I will even argue, or Christianity. But with that in mind, the first thing to remember is science is the wrong field. The second thing to remember is that science proclaims the glory of God. Science proclaims the glory of God. Now let's see what the Bible has to say about studying nature. I'm going to tell you that the Bible actually encourages science. What? Yeah, Old Testament and New Testament. Psalm 19, 1 and 2. Day after day, your creation pours forth speech. Night after night, it delivers knowledge. Old Testament's telling us, hey, God's creation, aka nature, delivers knowledge. Guess what? Paul adds to that in the New Testament. And we can gain knowledge by studying God's creation, knowledge about God, Romans 1:20. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So what can we get from this? If God reveals himself to humanity via natural revelation, natural revelation, revelation in nature, what is revealed to us in nature, then we ought to study nature to learn things about God. Guess what? That's science. Study nature. This is a biblical idea. You see, when humans study nature, when we study God's creation, we engage in science. Now, you might be scratching your head right now. Because didn't I just say that science is the wrong field? To prove or disprove the existence of God? If so, then how can studying science proclaim the glory of God? Talk about self-defeating statements, Tim. You just got done preaching about irrational, self-defeating statements, and now aren't you doing just that? How can Romans 1:20 be true? Maybe you're not thinking that, but when atheists hear me say that, this is where they go. How can Romans 1:20 be true? How can we learn about God by studying nature if science is the wrong field, like you just got done telling us for the last 20 minutes? Self-defeating statement, Tim. You're guilty. No, I'm not. Although science is the wrong field, as I said, to prove or disprove the supernatural, let me tell you what science does do. Science is not a prover of the supernatural. It's a pointer to the supernatural. Science does not prove, but it points. There's a difference between proving and pointing. You see, since science is the study of nature, it's impossible to directly prove or disprove the existence of anything supernatural, like God, or the soul, or angels or demons, or abstract objects. It's impossible to directly prove or disprove these things scientifically. But with that said, science can and does point to and provide indirect evidence of the supernatural. Now here's something I like to remind myself of from time to time. In fact, I write this on one of those little yellow sticky notes and I have it on my desk next to some Bible verses that I try to memorize. So let's see how I do right now without looking at my notes. I have different versions too, like the ESV version of this and the NIV, so you know. But scientific data provides support for premises and logically deductive and abductive arguments reaching logical conclusions with supernatural or theistic significance. How'd I do? All right, here's another version of it. Science provides support for premises and philosophical arguments reaching logical conclusions with supernatural significance. Okay, that's a mouthful. That simply means that science supports logical arguments for the existence of God. Science is a supporter. Science is a pointer and a supporter. Consider the following example. The Kalam cosmological argument. Raise your hand if you've heard of the Kalam cosmological argument. You know, I get really excited when I see that the majority of people in a crowd have not heard of this argument before. So we're going to discuss this. The Kalam, in my opinion, is one of the most intriguing arguments for the existence of God. So allow me to offer a brief overview. The Kalam consists of two easy-to-remember steps leading to a logically deductive conclusion, which follows like mathematics. How many of you are familiar with math? Did you know even math assumes logic? I told you earlier that logic is bedrock. Math, you can't do math without first presupposing logic. You know, sometimes I'll even talk to Christians. They're like, oh, Tim, you're just getting into man's logic. I'm like, well, what does that even mean? Am I just using man's math? No, these are universals. These are grounded in the nature of God, I believe. But like I said, when you start with logic, you're starting with the nature of God. But how many of you have ever done any work on logical or syllogisms, logical syllogisms? Anybody ever heard of a syllogism? Just a handful of you at most, okay? I'm going to back up and give you a little lesson in logic. I'm going to give you two statements, and I bet you can come up with the third, what follows from these two statements. If I said, number one, all fish have gills. Right? All fish have gills. Number two, Nemo is a fish. Number three, what can you tell me about Nemo? Good job. Right? You guys know your logic. Here's another one. One, if there is no liquid, Nemo does not swim. Two, Nemo does swim. Three, I can't quite understand that, but I think you said, therefore, there is what? There is liquid. Good job. Good job. Okay, we're just going to do the same kind of thing. Now, sometimes when you hear these statements, you can say, well, what do you mean by liquid? And you can start breaking it down and debating over little words and things like that. But the structure, you can see, when we're doing logical syllogisms, we're looking at two things. We're seeing, is the structure correct? Now, maybe, I believe that all fish have gills, but maybe you're like, well, there's one fish that doesn't have gills. So we need to, and we're like, really? Well, let's look at the evidence for that. But you can see that if it's true that all fish have gills, and if it's true that Nemo is a fish, then you know that Nemo has gills, right? It's just as true as saying, well, if you have this many things plus this many things, then you've got this many things, right? If you got two things and three things, then you have five things, right? It's just as, it's mathematically certain, right? So it comes down to this. Are your statements true? Well, now let's look at the Kalam cosmological argument. The first premise, the first statement is this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. We're talking about beginnings right now. Second, the universe, all nature, began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe, all nature, had a cause. Now, I've explained and defended this Kalam cosmological argument at length on freethinkingministries.com, so I encourage you to go there. I've got some videos on this too. So I encourage you to click around if you want to delve deeper into this argument. And really, since I've got a Christian crowd here tonight, there's probably a lot of you here saying, well, Tim, are you talking about the Big Bang? The beginning of the universe? Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to talk about this Big Bang, because aren't we supposed to be opposed to the Big Bang as Christians? I'll get to that more here in a bit. Right now I want to point out premises right here. And by premises I mean the two statements that lead to the conclusion, right? These first two statements, they are both supported by science, by scientific data. And I will tell you that this argument, even though you don't see the word God up there anywhere, in the first two statements or the conclusion, if this argument is true, if it's sound, and if it's valid, then God exists. Now notice my humble claim. I'm not saying that science proves anything right now. I'm simply noting that science supports a couple statements. And we can do this without touching a Bible. I'm not touching a Bible right now. My Bible is in my backpack right down there. So I'm not opening a Bible. I'm not opening any religious book. I'm just thinking logically about science. And this is quite helpful when you're talking to people who don't believe that Christianity is true, or don't believe that God exists, or people that say that science has disproven Christianity. And this is the argument my son used with those two seniors a couple years ago. We can do this without touching a Bible, because they don't want you to start with the Bible. They're going to accuse you of the same thing that that young man accused me of: circular reasoning, a logical fallacy. People today, people on this campus are going to say, prove to me that I should trust your Bible without starting with your Bible. Don't reason in a circle. I'm like, okay, fine. That's what you want? You got it. We can do this by thinking logically about science, about scientific data. All scientific data supports that first statement: whatever begins to exist has a cause. That is to say that scientific data gives us good reason to think that that first premise is at least probably true, because science has always shown us that if something begins to exist, there's always a cause of it coming into existence. Or like I explained to my son when he was still in middle school, anything that's got a birthday has parents. Anything that's got a birthday has parents. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. In fact, that's what the entire enterprise of science is about. It studies cause and effect. For example, the decay of uranium causes lead to come into existence. The quantum vacuum causes the quark to come into existence. Here's an easy one. Freezing temperatures cause ice to come into existence. So the first premise is supported by science every single day, and there's not one instance that any scientist or anybody else has ever empirically observed that something has come into existence, that something that began to exist did not have a cause. Some people have tried to appeal to the quantum vacuum and say, well, look, some quarks can pop into existence in nothingness, which is the quantum vacuum. And you're like, no, the quantum vacuum is something. It exists. It's governed by the laws of nature. It's a sea of violent, fluctuating energy that forms these quarks, these particles to come into existence. So even that, they have a cause. All right, so needless to say, it's constantly verified every single day by science that whatever begins to exist has a cause. In fact, if a scientist notices something that begins to exist, what's the first thing they ask? What caused it? That's their job. It's cause and effect. So science supports the first statement. Notice my humble claim. I'm simply saying science supports. Perhaps there's something out there that began to exist that doesn't have a cause that nobody's ever seen. All I'm saying is science is supporting this claim. What about the second step? of the argument. The universe began to exist. By the universe, I mean all nature. It began to exist. Now, when I argue with atheists, I like to support this step of the argument through logic alone. I don't need science. And in fact, this is what I prefer to do, is just use logic to prove, to demonstrate that that second step of the argument is true. However, with that said, tonight the topic is about science. So I'm going to stick with science and simply note that science overwhelmingly supports that second step of the argument. Consider the scientific data supporting the statement, the universe began to exist. If you're taking notes, take good notes here, all right? Consider the second law of thermodynamics. I'm not going to get into the details here. I just want you to write these words down. You can go Google it later, right? But the second law of thermodynamics, I claim, is going to support that second step. Entropy supports that step. And Big Bang cosmology. All of this scientific data supports the second step of the Kalam, that the universe began to exist. Now, as I referenced earlier, I just appealed to Big Bang cosmology. Oftentimes when I talk to Christians, they're like, Tim, don't do that. We're Christians. We should be opposed to Big Bang cosmology. No. The Big Bang is our friend. It's our evidence. It's not theirs. I believe in the Big Bang. I affirm the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. Creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. Everything. That's the Christian view. In science, the Big Bang cosmology says the exact same thing. Creation of all nature out of nothing. All time, space, nature did not exist, and then it exists. Now, those things all support that second step of the argument. But if that's not enough, three of the leading physicists in the world today, Arvin Bohr, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, constructed a theorem known as the BGV, for Bohr, Guth, and Vilenkin, the BGV theorem of 2003. This is fairly recent. Right? They constructed a theorem which reaches the same conclusion, that all nature had an absolute beginning. Now keep in mind that these guys are not Christians. They don't have any theological axe to grind. They're just doing good science. Now Dr. Guth, the G in BGV, I think he's an atheist. I know he's not friendly to Christianity. But Dr. Guth concluded that there was a, quote, mother of all beginnings. And he stated, even within the context of inflation, there would still be somewhere an ultimate beginning. Now, he's known as the father of inflationary theory. If anybody here knows anything about the multiverse theory, he's the guy. But he's still saying, but look, even if the multiverse is true, that means multiple universes, you still have to have an original Big Bang, if you will, a mother of all beginnings. So this is really stronger than Big Bang cosmology. And Dr. Vilenkin, the V in the BGV, makes this point even stronger. Stephen Hawking invited Vilenkin to speak at his cosmology conference on Hawking's 70th birthday. And Hawking, at the beginning, noted that if it could be proven that the universe or all nature had a beginning, that we would have to appeal to the hand of God. But then Vilenkin, an agnostic, gets up and makes some startling claims. Vilenkin said, quote, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning, end quote. Now, I want to focus on two words here that Vilenkin used. He said the proof is now in place. If you know anything about science, you will know that scientists typically, if they're worth their salt, try to avoid words like prove. That's not typically what they try to do. They do like to disprove things. But a scientist is not usually trying to prove something. But Vilenkin here, and he is a scientist worth his salt, he's recognized as one of the leading cosmologists in the entire world. He's at Tufts University. He's willing to use the word proof. Why? Because there's so many converging lines of evidence that Vilenkin is confident enough that we can use that word, proof. Okay, that's great. Why is that a problem? Because he says we've got to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Why is he calling it a problem? Well, several things here. Because if all nature had a mother of all beginnings, as his colleague Alan Guth said, right? If all nature had a mother of all beginnings, then this mother must be something other than nature. This mother must be something other than nature, and that's what philosophers call supernatural, other than nature. You see, we've got scientific evidence here that this is where science stops. Now, that's a problem for the scientist, especially for the scientist that says science is the only way to know. Now they got two problems. Because we've got scientific evidence that science comes to an end. All things that are scientifically testable or discoverable, even potentially discoverable or testable, began to exist. That means if you want to ask any questions about what happened before that Big Bang, that's the wrong field for the scientist. They're out of a job. They just put themselves out of a job. Does that mean we can't know anything about what happened before that Big Bang? Are we done? Nope. Now we go to metaphysics, which simply means beyond physics. We have data pointing to the supernatural. Now Vilenkin is an agnostic, and like I said, I think Guth is an atheist, but they admit the data for the first miracle. And by miracle here, I mean the first, or for a supernatural event. You see, even scientists are saying that at least one miracle occurred. Because if all nature began to exist, it can't be a mere natural event. A supernatural event took place. At least one miracle has occurred. Here's the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, it had to have a beginner. With that in mind, you got two options. Either no one created something from nothing, that's the atheist view, or someone created something from nothing. That's the theistic view. I'm just going to ask a question. What view seems more reasonable? What's the inference to the best explanation? Whatever the case may be, we have scientific data demonstrating that the job of a scientist comes to an end. Science can't tell us any more about what caused the universe, but logical thinking can finish the job. That's our metaphysics. Even when science comes to an end, logic and reason continue. Remember, I said logic is bedrock. And who is logic? Remember, if you're in Sunday school, and we're all Christians here, I think. If you're in Sunday school and anybody asks a question, you're probably going to get it right if you say Jesus. Right. So who is logic? Yeah, right. The principle of understanding reality. Only way to understand reality. But we'll not jump to that conclusion just yet. right? We're just going to keep thinking logically about what scientific data has already pointed to. Now, this shouldn't bother anyone, starting with logic, because science, this definitely shouldn't bother the scientist, who is also an atheist, because science assumes logic, not the other way around. Sometimes they're surprised to realize that. By the way, scientists aren't typically trained in logic. You can go all the way through your PhD and never have one class in logic. That's a travesty. Math assumes logic, like I said earlier. Logic is bedrock. So with that in mind, it doesn't make any sense to say that nature existed before all nature existed, right? That's incoherent. If you said, hey, all nature began to exist, hey, what's the cause of that nature? Nature. No, look, all nature began to exist. So what could cause nature? Oh, well, something natural. No, that's incoherent. That's irrational. We want to be rational tonight. So you cannot say that something nature created all nature. So if all nature began to exist, it follows that something that is not nature caused nature. Therefore, the cause of all nature, what we mean by the universe, the space-time universe, must be something other than nature. Like I said, that mother of all nature had to be something other than nature. Supernatural. So right off the bat, the study of nature, science, points, like I said, it's not a prover, it's a pointer. It points to a supernatural cause of the universe. Now, let's continue thinking logically. If the first two steps of that Kalam argument are true, which is they're both supported by science, it leads us to a startling but logical conclusion. You can see it right there. Therefore, the universe had a cause. All nature had a cause. All right, now I told you, you could say when you're talking about these logical arguments, okay, what do you mean by fish? What do you mean by gills? What do you mean by liquid? Right? You can ask these questions. Let's do that here, because you see, the word God is nowhere to be found in this syllogism. So why are people freaking out over it? Why do atheists hate this argument? Because once you define the word universe, things begin to get clear. Let's define the word universe. It's defined as all nature, time, and space, and everything that could possibly or potentially be tested or discovered scientifically. And science, as we've discussed, tells us that all of this stuff began to exist. So given this description, the cause of the universe cannot be anything that fits within the definition of the universe or anything that is contingent upon the universe. If something depends upon the universe for its existence, can it be the cause of the existence of the universe? No. Not if it depends upon the universe. And since it makes no sense to think that the universe caused itself to begin existing, it follows that the cause of the universe must be something other than the space-time universe. That is to say, the cause of the universe must be something other than the universe or anything found within the universe. I think I've said that several times. I just want that to get in your heads. So from this, it follows that the cause of the universe must possess certain properties. Now, this is where it gets cool. Question: what could have caused space, matter, and time, all nature, if space, matter, time, and nature had a birthday? What's the parents? What is this parent like? What is this thing that caused the universe? What's it like? We can know some things. The metaphysician, the logician, the one who studies logic, can know some things. We can gain knowledge of the cause of the universe. The scientist can't do it. At least they don't have the expertise to do so, according to their PhD. But logicians and metaphysicians can finish the job. What do we know about nature? If all nature began to exist, the cause of all nature had to be something other than nature. So right off the bat, The majority view of atheism in the world today is that called naturalism, that nature is all that exists. Right? The vast majority of atheists that you'll talk to on college campuses today will be naturalists and claim that only scientifically testable or discoverable things, nature, exists. Nothing else. There's no God, there's no soul, there's no angels, there's no demons, there's no abstract objects. There's just the stuff we can empirically verify. Naturalism. Guess what? Just by thinking logically about scientific data, we've realized that that view is false. Take it off the table. So this atheistic naturalism is done. It's dead. Just by thinking logically about science. And they want to tell us that science is in opposition to God. No, sorry. Science is in opposition to atheism, to naturalism. Science is our evidence, not yours. And guess what? That's what my son was able to explain to these football players. They appeal to the Big Bang of all things. This little freshman, my son at the time, well, still my son, freshman at the time, turned that around on him. Said, no, that's my evidence, thank you very much. So right off the bat, if all nature had a beginning, which science tells us that it does, then we know that a supernatural cause created all nature, and thus naturalism is false. What else do we know about this cause of the space-time universe? Well, if space began to exist, then the cause of space could not have existed within space before creating all space. So, the cause of all space is spaceless. That follows logically. Okay, but guess what? Matter requires space to exist. If there is no space, there is no matter. Great job, you're still with me. Okay, so if there's no space, there's no matter. So if space and matter began to exist, we have a spaceless and immaterial cause of the universe. Think about that. We've got an immaterial substance that caused the space-time universe. Some people would call that spirit. But if you don't like that word for some maybe emotional reason, that's fine. Just call it immaterial. So right off the bat, thinking logically about scientific data, we've got a supernatural, spaceless, immaterial cause of the universe. Well, guess what? If the space-time universe began to exist, let's focus on the word time. If time began to exist, could the cause of time exist in time before creating time or causing time? Or think about it this way. Imagine a state of affairs in which the clock is not ticking. Okay, there's no ticking clock. Imagine that. And then the clock starts ticking. If the clock is ticking, time, right? Then could the cause of time and that ticking clock exist in a state of affairs in which that clock is already ticking if that cause created or made the clock start ticking? No, that doesn't make any sense. So the cause of all time has to be timeless. And if the cause of the space-time universe is timeless, then we know something about it, that it's eternal without beginning. Why? Because beginnings require time. You can't have a beginning apart from time. So it's eternal, whatever it is. Look, I'm not jumping to any conclusion right now. There's no Bible. I don't have a Bible on me. It's in my backpack. Yeah, I'm still a good Christian. I got a Bible with me, right? Even if I don't have it up here. But I'm not touching it. I mean, we've got a supernatural, spaceless, immaterial, call it spirit if you will, timeless and eternal without beginning. Oh, and guess what? If something is eternal without beginning, can you ask what caused that, whatever it is? Does it make any sense to say, hey, there's something out there that does not have a beginning. What caused that? That's an incoherent question. I gave a talk similar to this with Frank Turk a couple nights ago in Nebraska, at the university there. And I got done explaining all of this. And a young man comes up, he's going to stump me. Well, what caused the cause of the universe? I was like, were you listening? Right? We have thought logically about scientific data, realizing that the space-time universe began to exist, and therefore the cause of time must be timeless, and if it's timeless, it's beginningless, and if it's beginningless, it exists eternally without beginning, and therefore nothing could cause it to come into existence because it simply exists, whatever it is. I'm not jumping to any conclusions right now. Whatever it is that caused the universe exists without beginning, and thus could not have been caused to exist. That's just logic. What else do we know about this cause of the universe? Well, it's got to be extremely powerful, I know that, because I can't think of anything that would require more power than causing an entire universe to come into existence from nothing. I'm not saying this is an omnipotent thing, whatever it is. It sure seems to point that way. Whatever it is, it's extremely powerful. And I'll tell you one more thing. Whatever this cause of the universe is, it's got to be a volitional mind. A mind with free will. Well, why has it got to have free will? Well, and by the way, only minds could have such a property of free will. The ability to make a choice or not to make a choice. But as the Greek physicist Foitini Markopoulou has stated, apart from time, things don't happen. Apart from time, things don't happen. And we've just thought logically about scientific data, realizing that there was a state of affairs in which there was no time. It's mind-blowing. It's hard to conceive. It's hard to apprehend. But on paper, we can understand it. But now, aren't we in trouble? Because I've just stated there's a state of affairs that's apart from time. Foitini Markopoulou is making a great point. She's right. She's saying apart from time, things don't happen. Well, but then, how did the universe happen? If apart from time, things don't happen. She's right. There's nothing happening in this state of affairs in which there is no time. There's no decay over time. There's no emerging over time. There's nothing happening. It's a static state. Static, completely static. Nothing happening. And then, boom! Big Bang. How? Well, apart from time, things don't happen unless a volitional mind exists in that static state, in that timeless state, who can make a choice to act or not. Now, I'm not jumping to any conclusions right now. I'm not saying this is God. But sometimes I'll talk to Christians and they're like, well, what are you doing for all that time before he created time? That's an incoherent question, right? You might as well ask, why did God create so quickly? There was no time in that state. Anyway, how am I doing on time here? Got some time. Speaking of time, how am I doing on time? All right. So that's true unless a personal mind with free will exists and who can make a choice. He's in a state of affairs in which the clock is not ticking and then chooses to act and makes the clock start to tick. So, simply by thinking logically about scientific data, we can now see that a supernatural, eternal, extremely powerful, and personal being was the cause and creator of the universe. So I hope you see that we aren't touching any religious books at the moment. There are no Bible verses used to make this case, but with that said, what does this supernatural, eternal person sound like? What? God. Sure sounds like God. Now, somebody might want to be out there and say, well, no, it's not God, it's something else. Okay, fine. Call this supernatural, eternal, immaterial, extremely powerful, personal being anything you'd like, but a rose by any other name smells just as sweet. It's God. You just don't want to call it God. Him, God, I should say at this point. Okay, so now, have we demonstrated that this is the God of the Bible? No, not yet. More data is required. But we've significantly reduced our worldview options. For example, as I noted earlier, atheism and naturalism, it's been taken off the table as a possible explanation of reality. Using science as opposed to naturalism. What other worldview have we disproven here, really? Mormonism. It's been taken off the table. Why? Because Mormonism holds that the universe is past eternal. And that the universe created humans, and that humans can become gods. Gods with little g's. But there's no big G creator of the universe on the Mormonism view. So if you think about it, Mormonism is kind of an atheistic view. Some would say it's either atheistic or polytheistic. But if you're going to call it polytheism, it's just like Zeus and Thor, humanoid being. Now Thor is really cool. I'm an Avengers fan. But even the Avengers movies, the Marvel movies, will say, well, yeah, he's a god, but that's a little g god. Captain America says, there's only one God, ma'am, and he doesn't dress like that. Well, that's exactly right. Because Captain America is referring to the big G God, the creator of the universe. But Mormonism is taken off the table as a possible explanation of reality. So say goodbye to atheism, say goodbye to Mormonism. And you can also say goodbye to, say goodbye to Zeus and Thor. Does Thor exist? I can't disprove his existence. Maybe he does exist somewhere in Asgard, somewhere in the universe. But is he the cause of the universe? No. Because he's the kind of thing that's contingent upon the universe. The flying spaghetti monster is ruled out. Could the flying spaghetti monster create the entire universe? No, because the flying spaghetti monster is contingent upon spaghetti and carbs. Right? And carbs don't exist if the universe doesn't exist. Therefore, carbs cannot be the cause of the universe. You can rule out, there's around 4,000 worldviews and religions to choose from that have ever existed on this planet. We can rule out almost all of them, and we're really basically left with 4 main worldviews, 4 main ones. The final 4, what are they? Islam. Looking at this argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, Islam might be true at this point. Not looking at any other data. Okay, Islam, you're in the final 4. Good job. Judaism. It's a possibility. The Jewish religion. All right, you're still in the game. Final 4. Good job. Deism. Some would claim that this was Thomas Jefferson's final view. I would argue that he had Christianity in mind when drafting our nation's original documents. In fact, atheism is un-American, side note. Atheism cannot make sense of the Declaration of Independence. There's no such thing. I'm going to talk about this tomorrow in Kentucky. What campus is that? Oh yeah. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be touching on this there. But atheism can't make sense of these objective and unalienable rights given to us by our Creator with the capital C, by the way. Atheism is un-American. Anyway, I would say that Thomas Jefferson had Christianity in mind. In fact, I've got several articles on my website about this topic. So you've got Islam, Judaism, Deism, and guess what? Christian theism in the final 4. Christian theism, or just simply Christianity, could explain reality. Now, side note, let me quickly point out that 3 of these options, Islam, Judaism, and Deism, all reject the historical resurrection of Jesus. Christianity, on the other hand, affirms the historical resurrection of Jesus. So, if there is historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, then we can see that only one view rises to the top of that final 4 and is the champion of the universe. If there is historical evidence. And by the way, this tonight is a talk on science, not history, but I will simply point you to the work of Mike Licona, or Michael R. Licona is his official name, Gary Habermas, William Lane Craig, N.T. Wright, some fantastic historians who use nothing but the historical method to demonstrate that the resurrection, not just the crucifixion of Jesus, but actually the resurrection was a real event in history. And by the way, there's some guy here named Caleb Jackson. There he is. He actually wrote a book called Undead. I haven't read it yet. He just gave it to me, but I think he's doing the similar things here. So I'd encourage you to talk to Caleb if you would like historical evidence of the resurrection. Back to science, namely cosmology. Here's a question I have for atheists. If there is no God, then why is there something rather than nothing? If I've asked that question once, I've asked it 1,000 times, and I've never received a good answer. It ultimately comes down to a blind faith in atheism. Now, I don't know about you, but as Frank Turk says, I don't have that kind of faith. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. The evidence points to Christianity, or at least points to theism, and then when you tie in the resurrection with two arguments, you get Christianity. Now, one more thing. Remember how I explained that the Kalam cosmological argument, that when you use this argument, we can decipher that this is a volitional mind with free will. Well, only personal beings are the kinds of things with volitional minds with free will. So we can rationally conclude here that the cause of the universe is a personal being. Again, my Bible is in that backpack down there. I'm not using any Bible verses. I've just thought logically about scientific data, and we've concluded that the cause of the universe is a personal being. How many of you in the crowd tonight are personal beings? Raise your hand if you're a person. What? I see some of you not raising your hands. Raise your hand high. Be proud if you're a person. Okay, I think that's now everybody except for Caleb. Caleb was not raising his hand because he was looking at his phone. Right? I called you out, brother. Okay. No, I think it was probably for a good reason. He's probably texting like, you got to hear Tim Stratton. You got to book him at your next event. In fact, subscribe to his YouTube channel. I'm sure that's what you're doing, so thank you. Thank you very much. But I think we're all persons here. Well, guess what? If the cause and creator of the universe is a personal being, and we've reached that conclusion simply by thinking logically about scientific data, and you're telling me that each and every single one of you is a personal being, then something else logically follows. It logically follows that it's at least possible for you to have a personal relationship with any other personal being. That means it's logically possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe. We reach that conclusion by thinking logically about science. Haven't touched the Bible, but guess what? That's exactly what the Bible says too. Not just that it's possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe, but it tells you exactly how to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe. Through Jesus. John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father. Nobody has a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe but through me. Maybe we should take the Bible seriously, because when we think logically about science, we see that science reaches the same kinds of conclusions that the Bible says too, that it's possible for you to have a personal relationship with the cause and creator of the universe. How cool is that? I need to, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip. Now, I was worried about having enough content, but let me end really quickly. Well, let me see where I'm going here. Science supports the existence of an extremely powerful, uncaused, immaterial, eternal, and supernatural personal cause of the universe. Science supports the Bible. And arguments like the Kalam are vital for evangelism in today's culture. Let me give you, I've got several stories. I could tell the story of a student that goes to Duke University who is about to lose her faith, but thinking logically about science helped her. But I'm going to share a story of a friend of mine who's a biologist, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Nebraska. She was an atheist. Her class was converting many young students away from Christianity. And she saw that I was debating her colleagues in the local newspaper. This was when I first got into apologetics. So I was still kind of wet behind the ears. But, I was doing my best. And she saw that her colleagues were really being jerks and being disrespectful, and I was always trying to be respectful. And she came up, she saw me at a restaurant in town, she said, "Hey, Tim, you're Tim Stratton, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Just want to let you know that although I disagree with you, and I agree with my colleagues, I got to tell you that I got to apologize on behalf of my department. My friends are jerks, and you're not. You're very respectful, and thank you for how you're behaving. They can learn from you in that department, but they're right about what you're arguing about." And I said, "Well, thank you, but we should talk about this, the two of us, and have a respectful conversation." So we started having an email conversation back and forth almost every day. And I gave her the Kalam cosmological argument. And it shows, no matter what she thinks about evolution, that you can't get around this anymore. You can't get around a personal, supernatural cause and creator of the universe. So you kind of do an end run on the whole evolution debate. I didn't even have to debate. I tried to debate evolution with her. That's her field. I realized, okay, let's just skip this and get straight to the universe, the beginning of the universe. And I remember watching her over the course of time. She went from being an atheistic naturalist to then, okay, there's got to be more to the reality than just nature. Okay, I'm open to some supernatural things. Okay, I guess there is a supernatural personal creator of the universe. I guess that's God. Okay, right before Christmas, she's like, "Okay, Tim, I think I believe in God." I'm like, "Really?" The evolutionary biologist who is causing atheism on the campus, now saying, "I'm not an atheist anymore." And then she said, "But wait a second, now you said that there's evidence, historical evidence for the resurrection?" I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Mike Lacona is one of my best friends. I'll get you connected. Yeah, you guys can have a conversation." She goes, she's the most skeptical person I've ever seen in my life. She's skeptical of everything. That's how she's been trained, to be skeptical. And she goes, "Yeah, I'm going to need to see that historical evidence." And then she goes, "But wait a second. I think I already believe it." You could see that this Kalam argument it's like I call it the wrecking ball. It knocks down this wall of lies that people believe. It knocks down this wall of lies, and all of a sudden she's now open. Before she even saw the evidence of the resurrection, and she did want to look at it, and she did realize it, but she then gave her life to Christ. Yeah. Now, she's still, yeah, right? Praise God. Now, maybe many of you want to keep clapping. She still believes evolution is true, but she believes that God created that way. I don't care. She's now telling this, instead of causing atheists, she's telling her students, I believe that God created the entire universe and that there's intelligent design behind evolution, that God created that way. I might disagree with her on some of that, right? But she's getting the main thing right. And she tells her students now, there's no contradiction between science and the gospel. Hallelujah is right. In fact, she spoke with Frank Turek and I the other night. And she came up and she said, I was trained to be a skeptic. And I am still skeptical to this day, she says. She goes, I'm so skeptical that if Jesus would have shown up in the flesh, I would have written it off as a brain tumor. But reason convinced me, because you can't reason away reason. So if you ever wonder if apologetics are important for the church, she said, experiencing Jesus in the flesh, she would still think, I must be having a brain tumor. But you can't reason away reason. And Isaiah says, come, let us reason. Reason brought her to Christ. Logic brought her to the Logos. I can tell you more of these stories. Finally, let me just get through this. Some people study the Word of God. They're theologians. Some people study the work of God. They're theologians. They're called scientists. Those who study nature, those who study the work of God are scientists. Scientists don't realize it, but they are theologians. Oftentimes they don't like to hear that, but it's true. I just said that. Science should not cause you to ever doubt God. It should bring you to worship Him. I remember the first time I grasped this cosmological argument. There's other scientific-based arguments too. The fine-tuning argument is one. Didn't even get into it tonight. But when I, as a youth pastor, was sitting back there trying to think of how to answer this young man's his objections and questions, and I first grasped this Kalam cosmological argument, my knees hit the floor. I began crying, tears of joy. I felt like I saw this bigger view of God. I felt like I'd been looking at God through a little crack in the door, and then all of a sudden, boom, that door was just blown off its hinges. And in fact, the whole wall came tumbling down. And I felt like I saw a big view of God. And I was like, oh, wow. Science can lead you to worship God. Science is our friend as Christians. We might not have all the answers, but never doubt that science is on our side. It is the study of nature. And like it says in Psalm 19, day after day, your creation pours forth speech. Night after night, it delivers knowledge. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
You bet.
We're going to open it up to some questions and answers for Tim. So if anybody has a question, if you could come up and line up here, we will take questions one at a time.
I just want you to finish the story about your son. Tell us the rest of the story.
Oh, okay. So if you didn't hear it, she wants to hear the rest of the story about my son who was having that conversation with those football players. And he basically gave you the nutshell flyover summary of what I gave you tonight with the Kalam cosmological argument. And so they realized, just like any rational person would do, that wow, I need to rethink this atheism here. And he was able to show them that, look, science points to a supernatural, immaterial, timeless, eternal, extremely powerful, and personal cause of the universe. And that's exactly what we mean by God. And so he rocked them. Now, I don't know if I know they didn't become Christians on the spot or anything, and they graduated that year, and so Ethan hasn't had contact with them. But, Greg Kokel, do you guys know who Greg Kokel is? I think he's been here before, right? Those of you might know him. He says, as an apologist, my job isn't to convert people on the spot. My job, that's great if it happens. Sometimes it does happen. But he says, my job is to put stones in their shoes, to give them something to think about, so that every step they take, leaving that conversation, they're stepping on a stone, and that's uncomfortable. And they gotta take their shoe off and do something with that stone to get comfortable in life again. But Greg is talking about if you drop stones, and that's what my son Ethan did. He put some big rocks in their shoes, and they were limping walking away from that conversation. They have to do something. And so really, it comes down to this. They'll be uncomfortable for the rest of their lives, or they will come to Christ. And so it's kind of like planting seeds at the same time, too. Same kind of thing. But yeah, great. Thanks for asking.
Tim, one of the questions that comes up with atheists when you talk about this is that they will say, well, chance. It happened by chance. So why don't you give us some instructions on how to answer the chance topic? Well,
yeah, so first of all, we're talking about a timeless state of affairs, right? So where the clock is not ticking. So nothing, first of all, you can't appeal to chance. There's zero chance for something to happen if things aren't happening. Right? If there is a state of affairs in which the clock is not ticking, like Foitini Markopoulos stated, apart from time, things don't happen, and that includes things happening by chance. So it just doesn't matter. Now, if we go to the fine-tuning argument that I briefly mentioned, the fine-tuning argument shows how chances can be ruled out also. Because going back to the Big Bang, not just it's miraculous that the Big Bang happened in the first place, but then you have to say, well, why is it fine-tuned in such a way that the universe can even exist, and even further, that any life could exist not just on Earth or anywhere within the universe. Even if you believe in evolution, the initial conditions of that Big Bang have to be dialed in just right, not just for the existence of the universe, but for evolution to occur anywhere in the universe, let alone on Earth. So to get an idea, I stole this from Frank Turek. Imagine that you have a special tape measure that you can stretch out across the entire known universe. And as it expands, the tape measure grows, right? Now, let's talk about the gravitational force. There's about 12 of these tape measures that you have to have. But let's just talk about the gravitational force. Stephen Hawking noted that if the gravitational force was just slightly stronger, then the universe would have collapsed back in on itself. No universe. Or if the universe was slightly weaker at the Big Bang, it would have expanded so rapidly that stars couldn't form. And if there is no stars, there's no planets. And if there is no planets, there's no humans or life of any kind. There's no cockroaches if there's no stars. So if there is, the initial conditions of the Big Bang have to be dialed in, fine-tuned on a razor's edge for the existence of the universe, for matter to exist, let alone life, even if it's evolved, right? So with that in mind, let's just talk about the gravitational force, one of about 12 things that we got to look at. Gravitational force alone, you stretch that tape measure across the entire known universe and pick any inch, just 1 inch on that entire universe-sized tape measure, and that represents your gravitational force, that if it's any different, disaster. Now, so you move that inch 1 inch to the left or 1 inch to the right, you're dead, and so is the universe. Now, like I said, you got about 12 of those. Like Frank Turek, I don't have enough faith to think that all of those little inch marks just happened just by chance. So the much better explanation is design. That's like looking at Mount Rushmore and thinking, just happened by chance. Really? Is that the best explanation? And if you think about Mount Rushmore, it makes much more sense to say that Mount Rushmore happened by chance than it does to say that the initial conditions of the Big Bang were that the first explosion exploded just right for the universe to even exist, let alone you. So, yeah, chance is ruled out. First of all, chance doesn't even come into play because apart from time, things don't happen, and that includes things by chance. So, yeah.
Any other questions? We do have some book giveaways still. Oh, yeah.
Oh, we got some. Good.
I was just wondering, my name's Jim, I go by Mr. Batman.
Batman, I was going to say, I love your shirt.
But how does God explain natural laws? Because I used to be an atheist, and when I would actually proclaim atheism, that was one of the things I would use was natural laws.
Okay, what do you mean by natural law? Because there's several different ways that, are you talking about physics and chemistry?
Yes.
Okay. How does God explain them?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say he creates them and fine-tunes them to be exactly as they are.
Right. I agree with that.
Okay.
But what about laws of logic? Are they created laws?
No.
So what makes them different?
Well, first of all, I would, there's debate on this even among evangelical philosophers and theologians. So Dr. Craig, William Lane Craig, for example, thinks that things like the laws of logic don't actually exist, that they're useful fictions. And I would tend to agree. But
Another question?
Caleb's over there.
Yeah, come on up. We want to get you on the video.
Yeah.
Come on right over here.
Well, first of all, thank you for the shout out.
He wants you on the
Yeah, you bet. This is the guy that wrote the book. I haven't even read it yet, but he's a good guy. It's got to be a good book.
Thanks. That wasn't
Yeah.
my question. But no, it was actually about the Kalam. So you briefly mentioned the second law of thermodynamics, right? I was wondering, couldn't someone say the first law of thermodynamics would kind of counteract that? Because if it says matter can't be created nor destroyed, then how do you have a beginning to?
Yeah, that would be true within the universe.
Right.
So that's what true within the arena of the universe, but the arena still had to be.
Right. And the second one was, you mentioned the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, which people like Craig and stuff use a lot. But I have heard some people say, like Dr. Sean Carroll, for example, that that only apply, I don't want to get too technical here, to classical space-time as Einstein described it, and then when you get into quantum mechanics, it doesn't apply, and that could imply the universe is eternal.
Yeah, I disagree, and I think with the Craig versus Carroll debate, if one reads it, you can see that.
I didn't understand it when I watched it. So.
Yeah. No, a lot of people say, "Oh, well, Craig lost that one." No, go back and read it. If you just read it, I mean, even Carroll's model still has an initial point of singularity with time moving in two different directions. So you still got a mother of all beginnings,
right,
as Alan Guth affirmed. So I just don't see a way out of the Bohr-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. But note my humble claims again. I simply noted that science supports the first two premises of the Kalam. So am I going to say that doesn't mean that other people can't try to disprove it? No, try it all you want. All I'm saying is the most successful scientific theories out there are the ones the most successful scientific theories support the first two steps of the Kalam.
Right.
So
just because you brought up Guth though real fast, I think Carroll did bring up a picture of Guth.
He did, and it was confusing, and everybody, and go to my website. I've got an article written. Well, it's a guest article that Robert Cram, I think his name, wrote, and it discusses that very point because Guth, like I said, he's an atheist. I don't even think he likes his own conclusions. But he stood up there holding a sign that said something like, "The
universe is probably eternal."
Probably eternal.
Yeah.
But what did he just say when he was being interviewed on Closer to Truth? He affirmed there was somewhere a mother of all beginnings. So, okay, Guth, you're going to hold up a sign without explaining, but you went into depth and detail explaining that there was a mother of all beginnings. So we never got any answer. But based on his work and the BGB theorem and what Vilenkin has made clear, there's that problem of a cosmic beginning. And Guth's name is attached to that.
Right.
It's the BGB theorem. So I don't think he likes his conclusions. That's that's my hunch.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you bet.
Okay, anybody else? Not, let's give away a few more books. Where we go.
There's got to be more questions. Don't be shy.
Caleb Jackson.
He's getting a workout. Yeah, here you go.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I'll read it. Thanks. This book here is by Craig Hazen, and in October we're going to have J.P. Moreland and Craig Hazen to Fern Creek Christian Church. So you'll be hearing more about that. But this is Craig Hazen.
You guys don't want to miss that. I did my master's work at Biola, and they're both Biola guys.
All right, Kara Chambers. Kara snuck out, huh?
Ah, that's what you get. Leaving early.
Barbara Thorne.
All right.
Leela Abbott.
All right. It's a good book.
Julie Muffler. Yeah. All right, and that is the end of the book. So, is there any more questions?
That's the one I wanted. Thank you.
I can think of questions you should be asking. Think about it. If you were an atheist, what questions would you have for me? Yeah.
Can you touch on the historical evidence of Jesus?
I can touch on it. Just really quickly, I'd say that historians have noted several historical facts. That there's so much evidence that these facts are virtually undeniable. So things like Jesus actually existed, that Jesus was crucified by the Roman government, that his followers, his disciples, actually believed that he rose from the dead. Of course, even atheist historians will say, well, surely, of course, Jesus didn't rise from the dead, but at least his disciples claimed he did, and they were willing to die for it. And then you got some guy named Saul, or who's known as Paul, who was persecuting Christians, who all of a sudden decided to join them to be persecuted himself for the same message. Now, of course, they'll say, well, they didn't really experience the risen Jesus because that kind of thing doesn't happen. They assume naturalism. Because as David Hume says, dead men don't rise naturally. Well, that's right, Dave. We agree. Right? So there has to be a supernatural cause. But now you're getting outside the scope of the historian. Just like science comes to an end once you get to the Big Bang, well, now the historian comes to an end at that point. Unless you're saying, is there historical evidence for a supernatural event? Just like you're saying, is there scientific evidence for a supernatural event? And so you can do the same thing. The same way we use the scientific method to point towards a supernatural event, you can use the historical method to point to a supernatural event. And that's exactly what Christians claim. And so, look, you take all these historical facts, and then you say, well, what best explains these historical facts? Why would these followers of Christ make this claim when they're not getting chicks out of the deal, they're not getting money out of the deal, they're not getting power out of the deal? Why would they continue to proclaim that Jesus rose from the dead when what they're getting out of the deal is persecution and execution? Why would they do that unless they really thought it was true? Now you get some guys, like some historians, that try to explain it away. Well, it must have been hallucinations. They were all experiencing hallucinations because, they were so sad and everything. And, well, okay, great. But a few things here. Hallucinations aren't shared, right? If I'm sleeping at night and I'm having this great dream about Hawaii, having a vacation there, and then my wife wakes me up and she's like, Tim, I got to wake you up because I was having a fantastic dream that we were having a vacation in Hawaii. I'm like, what? So was I. And then we started comparing notes and we're like, we were having the same dream, the exact same dream. Let's go back to sleep and get a free vacation out of the deal. Dreams don't work like that, and neither do hallucinations. And when people do have hallucinations because they're depressed or they're grieving the loss of a loved one, they know at the time that they're experiencing a hallucination. And they will tell you afterwards, yeah, I did have a hallucination, right? The disciples weren't doing that kind of thing. But Paul is the wild card in this whole thing. He wasn't sad that Jesus was executed. He hated Christians and he was killing Christians, right? So what best explains his conversion? The risen Jesus. And so you just look at all this and say, what's the best explanation? There's so many things. I'm sure Caleb can go into this. So he should stick around and answer your question in more depth and detail. But there's so many things like that the inference to the best explanation is that we have another supernatural event. We've already got scientific data that one supernatural event, one miracle occurred, and now we've got historical data that another supernatural event, another miracle occurred. And for Christianity to be true, and I'm talking about mere Christianity, if somebody wanted to write off every other miracle, right? I believe in the virgin birth, I believe Jesus walked on water, I was on the Sea of Galilee back in October, and it was just blowing my mind that I was on the same water that Jesus walked, right? I believe in all these other miracles. But for mere Christianity, as C.S. Lewis called it, to be true, all you need is two miracles. Creation of the universe ex nihilo, out of nothing, and the resurrection of Jesus. And guess what? What is awesome about God is those are the only two miracles that we need, and we've got evidence for both of them. How awesome is our God to give us access to those miracles. But anyway, I'd encourage you to stick around and talk to Caleb more about the resurrection. Glad you're here. Can punt to you. Any other questions? Yeah.
So I've noticed in this area especially, there's a lot of offshoots that are kind of cult-like, where they're doing a really good job of getting to the people and telling them about stuff. They're on billboards, they're passing out pamphlets. How can we as a church what's the best tactic? I mean, it's hard to even talk to them directly Do we just need to do a better job going to YouTube and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, I mean that's why, like I said, our website has been out for a little over 4 years now, but we recently launched the YouTube channel because that's where everybody's at. So we launched the website and YouTube because everybody has this with them wherever they go. And so if they got this and they, today's generation, they don't even go to Google anymore. They go to YouTube. And they type in their question to YouTube and see what videos pop up. And they're going to watch those videos. And when we realize this, we're like, we've got to have videos on YouTube. So when they search for their question, hey, does God exist? Boom, our videos come up. Hey, is Christianity true? Boom, ours come up. Because if we don't do that, the atheists are going to get them. I mean, this was back in 2008, that story I told you about. And he was convinced by the YouTube videos he was watching from the scholars who were on YouTube. All right, these were scholars who were atheist scholars that were on YouTube. So we've got to have Christian scholars on YouTube. So, but yeah, we've got to be out there. Christians can't be quiet. I mean, we can't be worried about offending people. The truth hurts. I mean, Jesus said he was going to come and bring a sword. He also said to love your neighbor and even to love your enemy. But the truth divides. And that's just the way it is. And we're called to speak the truth. And we can't worry about, look, you want to speak the truth in love. A lot of times I was thinking, for years I thought, okay, we got to speak the truth and love. And so is it 50-50? 50% truth and 50% love? Or is it 60-40, one way or the other? Or 70-30, one way or the other? 90-10, one way? No! It's 100% of both. Right? So you're always striving to be loving, but sometimes the most loving thing is to just be blunt and honest. Right? I try to take care of their hearts. But sometimes they just need the truth. But yeah, we got to be out there. We got to know our apologetics. For Christians, I know a lot of you tonight, this was your first exposure to stuff like this. That's great. So thankful you're here. What you've just done is you got your feet in the baby pool, in the shallow water. All Christians need to have their feet in the shallow water, right? Now, I say all Christians really need to get some swimming lessons and to be, comfortable in the 4-foot water because that's where the majority of the world is. There's a few of us who say, hey, let's go over to the diving pool in the deep water and do triple backflips off the high dive. Not all of us are called to do that in these apologetics waters. But I think all Christians are called to at least have their feet wet and know where the lifeguards are. And most of us are called to get in the 4-foot and know how to swim there. You might not be called to the diving pool where guys like, Frank Turek and J.P. Moreland and those guys are at. But you're called to know your apologetics, and you took a great first step tonight. Congratulations. Keep it up. You can keep learning from my ministry and crossexamine.org and books from, the books that we're giving out tonight. So keep it up. Yeah, question.
Okay, so real simply, in a sentence or two, can you explain why you believe God exists? Not all this stuff, just a real quick, somebody asks you and you need to give an answer. You have 45 minutes.
Yeah, well, I would say number one, because the universe, all nature had a beginning, and the cause of all nature has to be something other than nature, and the best explanation is a supernatural being who's extremely powerful, and that's what we call God. So that would be a elevator answer. I could also get into morality. So tomorrow night I'm going to talk about the moral argument. And that comes down to this: if there's ever only one thing that's really wrong, no matter what anybody thinks, then God exists. So I encourage you to come tomorrow if you can. How far away is the campus from here?
5 miles.
5 miles. You better be there. Because if there's one law that actually should be changed, then God exists. If there's one politician that you think is really wrong, then God exists. If it was really wrong for Ted Bundy to do what he did, God exists. If Hitler was really wrong, then God exists. I'll explain that tomorrow.
is 9 o'clock. If we can give Tim a big round of applause.
Thank you.
And just a reminder, we do have an event tomorrow at U of L, same time, doors open at 6:30, starts at 7. And then the reveal, if you go to the website, reveal.truth, and that is the website that will keep you up to date on future events that we hold through the Reveal Conference. Reveal-truth, yeah. So, again, thank you for coming, and we hope to see you soon.